welcome back to the Director's Garage. I am your host and resident idiot, Michael, and today it doesn't get much more stupid than this. Though I confess, I really try.
Oh, come on!
Today, it's on. This is the biggest shootout yet. We're putting up two hot category IEMs, the Empire Ears Odin against the Noble Audio Sultan. Good for about $6,500 worth of IEMs here. These are two IEMs at the very top of their game, and there's only space for one in the Director's Garage. So, if the Odin wins, it stays. If the Sultan wins, I'm selling you, buddy. I'm selling the Odin. So, everything is on the line in this shootout, including my wallet. So a few things before we start. First, how awesome was that John Moulton interview? The wizard behind the Noble Audio brand. So cool. That's like a dream episode for me to get to talk to the guy who invented this, you know? To get to pick his mind, the mind of a true genius, and the guy's forgotten more about his specialty than I'll ever hope to know. So it's a great story of success. You just gotta love hearing stories about guys like John winning. So good. Now, I'd never have gotten to meet John if it was not for the folks at Audio 46. They provided me with the Sultans that are a part of today's shootout. So a huge shout out to those guys. They are your personal audio superstore. I am so thrilled to have a partnership with them. They've been absolutely terrific, and they've stepped up in every conceivable way. And one last thing, I just want to say we're closing in on 1,000 subscribers. Now that's a magic number to anyone who has a YouTube channel. It's taken us 38 episodes and a lot of word of mouth to get us here. So I'm going to turn it around, and I'm going to honor you guys with a giveaway when we get to 1,000 subs. Click on the bell and do all that crap in the corner that you got to do. You know what to do. So just so you don't miss it when I make the announcement, okay? Now, when I do the sound check, I've already listened to these headphones on their own for hours and hours individually. So the sound check is the chance where I get to put the two headphones together and compare them side by side and listen to like the same song over and over on each one and try and pick out the nuances that differentiates the two. So for instance, you know, when I did the sound check on the Sultan, I said, you know, I haven't heard anything that quite images like the Sultan. Well, when I get to the shootout, this is my chance to actually test that theory and see if that that initial assessment. Hi, Howie. So, for instance, in the sound check, I said that I haven't heard anything that quite images like the Sultan, and then you do the shootout, and I get to learn if that initial assessment holds true. So, I like the process. It's almost like taking your ears to school. I highly recommend it and doing these types of comparisons for yourself. It makes you a better listener, and I learn things all the time, and not just like technical things. I learn things about my preferences, what I prefer in a tuning and what I prefer in a headphone, what matters to me, and what captures my imagination. This is going to be a big episode. I have a lot to talk about. These are really two world-class IEMs at the very top of the market. So let's get it started. And it begins with ergonomics. And this is one area that is not even close. For one, let's talk about the Odin and let's talk about the comfort level, because when you put these in, it is not a comfortable experience, and I find it actually, like, after 15 minutes I'm pretty much, you know, in pain. So I found out that if I take the IEM out a little bit and angle it up, I actually get a little better bass response. But that comes at the expense of blocking out outside sound, like the room noise around me, because you're not getting that full seal of pushing it all the way in. Now, when I go to the Sultan, it feels good. It feels the way that you should see an IEM. You just push it in and it blocks out a lot of the sound. In fact, with both of these in, I can't even hear myself talk. It blocks out sound that well. And part of the reason for that is that these things are made of aluminum. They're CNC aluminum. This is a block of aluminum that gets CNC'd away. And what that does, the aluminum, first of all, it blocks out sound tremendously well. And then the other thing is, these things are rugged. Like, you could probably drive a car over these and they'd emerge maybe a little scuffed up, but they'd be ready to play. And by contrast, the Odin is made of plastic, and that's kind of a negative, although it keeps them lightweight. And then the other thing is that when you put these in, there's this thing, it's disturbing. It's like a driver flex, they call it, and it's the diaphragm on the driver moving because you're changing the pressure on your inner ear canal, and you get this crackle. It's a crinkle, and that drives me absolutely crazy. And you don't get any of that on the Sultan. Maybe there's because of the relief, there's a relief pressure hole or something, and there's nothing like that on the Sultan, on the Odin. But for whatever reason, you get this flex that's just annoying to experience. Finally, we're going to talk about the cable and the cable situation. The Odin comes with a 2-wire copper with a cloth braid, and they do tend to tangle up quite easily. And by contrast, the Odin comes with this luxurious 8-wire braid. It's an octa down to a 4x, and they never tangle. It's a beautiful cable, and it's weighted properly. It's an easy call when it comes to ergonomics for the Sultan. Now, let's talk power. Now, both of these IEMs benefit from getting a little more juice in them. The Odin maybe more so than the Sultan. The Sultan is a remarkably efficient headphone for what it has in it. The N8 really pairs well with both of these. They both felt really at home on it. The N8 is maybe a little better with the Odin because of the tube stage. The Sultan is more source agnostic. I could put this on the N8, the SP1000, even my Hugo played just fine. But remember when I was putting the Odin through my tube Macintosh and I kind of called it like the best IEM experience I'd had? I found the exact same thing when I put the Sultan through the C2600. It was just amazing, and the tubes actually help the Sultan out in one key area, which is SOUNDSTAGE, because this is a much narrower sound, as it turns out, than the Odin. In fact, the Odin just kind of kicked its butt. But first, we're going to talk about dynamics, and there's really two kinds of dynamics I'm going to talk about for a second here. And the first is microdynamics, and that's kind of the granular instrument level. And like, say, a drum or a bass or something, the Odin to me does a better job of surprising me with bursts of sound on an instrument level. The Odin is maybe a little bit faster to my ears, and it's perhaps more capable of producing those surprises. However, when you get to a song level, let's call this macro dynamics, for lack of a better term, it's the Sultan for me, because when you have quiet sections that are juxtaposed with loud sections, think like Bohemian Rhapsody, for instance, the Sultan has this ability to go big in a big hurry. It just gets really massive, and I love the effect that the Sultan has. It's got a huge sound. When it hammers down, it brings the thunder. Now, next up, we're going to move on to imaging. And I got to tell you, it was an absolute 100% complete push. I listened to song after song, headphone, swapping headphone, passage after passage. These two IEMs image nearly identically. In fact, it's so close, I simply couldn't tell the difference, and it would be unfair to put one ahead of the other. They both image on a stellar level, and there's very few IEMs out there that will give you the imaging experience off of either of these. Now let's get to that SOUNDSTAGE battle. To me, it's really an easy Odin win, for me anyway. Now, I'm the first to tell you that I screw up my SOUNDSTAGE analysis more than any other category. But I also tell you that I'm an idiot at the beginning of every episode, so you can't be too surprised, right? But in this case, you really can't miss it. The Odin brings about 2 more feet beyond your ears. I was listening to Baby Blue by Badfinger, for instance, and there's space around. There's a piano that comes in late in the song that's off in the distance that just gives you great flavor and spatiality, and there's room between the instruments themselves. It's really, I mean, you can make an argument for the Sultan because you like that immersion quality, but I think that most people, most listeners would agree that the having the instruments a little bit away from you is preferable. So it's the Odin for me. I'm going to take a quick second and just caution you on one thing. Just because a headphone wins a category doesn't necessarily mean that the other sucks. Okay? So though the Odin has a better soundstage, in my opinion, than the Sultan, that doesn't mean that this doesn't have a good soundstage. It has a nice soundstage. It just doesn't compare well with the Odin. And that's it. Both of these headphones, I'm going to say it again, are world-class headphones. So just because the Odin doesn't win in some areas and the Sultan doesn't win in some areas doesn't mean that they don't perform in that area. It just means that, well, I kind of prefer this one to that one. With that, let's go to detail. And again, it's the Odin. The Odin is slightly faster to the note. It pulls out more micro detail. The only IEM that I've heard that bests the Odin is this one right here. This is the Shure KSE 1500. It's a pure electrostat and another just absolute world-class IEM. I was listening to Cannonball Adderley, something else, and the bass had tremendous micro detail on that one. You can hear the bass vibrating against the frets. It's such a neat experience, and the sax is super crisp. But here's like the backside of that, because in some cases it becomes a hyper realistic detail. Like it's actually overly detailed. It's more detail than you would expect to hear even in the absence of an IEM. So even like the experience of listening to live music sometimes doesn't present the detail that the Odin produces. And this, to me, can get a little on the fatiguing side. You do get that nice crisp attack of, like, say, a brush on a snare where you can kind of hear the individual bristles hitting the surface. That's really cool. But that detail, that hyper detail, is a big reason I feel that the Sultan is actually more musical. Things flow better, they blend better on the Sultan. Now the Odin, there's no question that there are pyrotechnics going on in this headphone when it comes to detail. It's impressive to just a wowing effect. And I'll say this right here, if you pride detail above all other features, then the Odin is for you. Don't even go further. Just get the Odin, because it's a detail king. But don't think that there's a lack of detail on the Sultan either. Remember, both of these have E-stat tweeters, and both of these have dynamic drivers. This one happens to have two dynamic drivers, but they're playing in the same field. So how much far apart really are they, So yes, this is hyper detailed, but this isn't bad. So, and then the other part of that is that neither of these headphones, like if you can throw something really complex, like say you put Yes through it, something with a lot of instrumentation where you've got all these instruments for competing for space in the same mix. Neither of these ever get an ounce of congestion. They don't get what I call gludgy, which is a technical term. Look that up. What I mean is, like, you have this sense that, like, a horn is crashing into a guitar, and it's just like you wind up with kind of a mush sound. It almost borders on overmodulation, but it's not. It just sounds like everything is competing to get a little space so that it can be heard. And that effect is not in evidence on either of these headphones, no matter what track I throw at it. These are that good. So to sum it up, and reference Spinal Tap, the Odin kind of goes to 11 on detail, whereas the Sultan kind of is sitting back at a cool 9. Now tonally, the Odin to me sounds thinner compared to the Sultan. The Sultan is a more full, robust, warm sound throughout the entire spectrum. The Odin sounds colder and more analytical to me. Now, that's not to say that this is a cold headphone, it's just colder than the Sultan. You know, I was talking about that. We're comparing here. So the Sultan is more musical to me, but keep in mind we're doing a comparison, and neither should leave you feel like the other one is somehow deficient. Like, you wouldn't say that this isn't musical. I'm just saying that this is a more musical headphone, right? So the Sultan kind of is more romantic and maybe goes a little darker, and the Odin stays a little more bright and lively. Now, somebody accused the Sultan of sounding thick in a negative way, and I have to disagree with that assessment, because to me, thick implies that it's like there's this veiled layer and it's just really down low and boomy and all of that. But the Sultan has a spectacular sparkle on the top end, and it defies what you might expect just putting them in when you hear that bass. There's an E-stat tweeter on top of everything, giving you this brilliant gloss layer. It's wonderful. And I've got to say, there is one other issue with the Odin, and that's that at times this to me can sound like two separate headphones jammed together. The treble frequencies, the treble part of the IEM, has a slightly different timbre or quality to it than the bass part of the headphone. So it, at times, and I'll give you an example later on, it can sound like the treble is sitting on top of the bass and they're separate. It doesn't come together into a cohesive sound. I get that from time to time on the Odin. So while the two sound signatures probably graph perfectly well, the reality is when you put them in and listen to them, sometimes they sound like they just don't belong together. Now, there's no question in my head that the Odin is a box of technical marvel. There's very, very, very few headphones that can do what the Odin can do. It's kind of like an Olympic athlete. You know, it's got these specialties and these muscles, and it does these specific things really well. But then you ask it to coordinate all those muscles and play tennis, and sometimes it can kind of stumble. So now we're going to talk about sound properties. When I talk about sound properties, you know where this is going. I talk about bass, I talk about mids, and I talk about treble. In that order. It just never gets old. I'm sorry. So let's start with the bass. Now the bass is actually closer than I expected. The bass is so prominent on the Sultan, I expected it to kind of run away with this category, and it did win, but it was much closer than I expected because the Odin is holding more detail in up its sleeve. So what it lacks in quantity, it adds in quality of detail by comparison. Now let's keep in mind, again, these are both world-class IEMs. For me, the edge on the Sultan is a mid-bass lift. The Odin drops out right after you get past the sub-bass. It just kind of like, you know, dives down there. And whoop is another technical term, look it up. But without that bass boost, it certainly avoids sounding bloated, but it also lacks a little bit of realism in that way. Like when I'm listening to an acoustic guitar on the Sultan, you get a sense of the body of the instrument. Like you can actually get a better feel for what an acoustic guitar sounds like. It's a better representation because it doesn't cut that mid bass. It actually fills in nicely with what's actually there, you know? So the Odin, it's no slouch. I mean, there's a good bass on the Odin, no question, and it thumps nicely, and it's got some punchiness, but it's just not as full. Okay, moving on to mids, it's going to be the Sultan again for me. The mids, particularly the upper mids, are elevated a bit on the Odin, and that, to me, it even bleeds into the lower treble frequencies, and that brightness, that's a brightness that I've only been able to kind of clear up by putting it through a tube amp. Whereas the Sultan, it just nails the mids. I mean, it's got that slight recession. You all know I like that slight recession in my mids. I could probably use it in real life too. But the vocals are solid on both. I prefer male vocals on the Odin, and on the Sultan, I like female vocals and higher range male vocals like Freddie Mercury, Geddy Lee, that kind of singer. Geddy really gets up there and at times gets a little bit on the harsh side on the Odin. And that leaves treble, and you know, there's no secret that I've always struggled with the Odin's treble. It's remarkably clear. There are pyrotechnics in the treble that are amazing, but it just pushes bright way too early for my taste. Now, I counter that, like I say, by running it through a tube and kind of rounding off some of that treble harshness. You might worry that you'd lose the detail that this thing brings, but these things are so far ahead of the world on detail. Cutting 10% off and sacrificing it to sort of round out the sound a little bit still puts this so far ahead of the rest of the IEMs out there. You've got nothing to worry about. It's a sacrifice I'd happily make to make these more listenable. Now on the Sultan, yeah, it doesn't have the treble detail, but it's got plenty of treble presence. It's got a beautiful tuning up top that never pushes harsh. Maybe plays it a little safe for some people. I just think it's beautiful. I think it's a beautiful, and it's an E-stat just like the Odin. It's coming from the same type of driver, so you're getting that Odin experience. It's just tuned a little better. Now we get to my favorite section of these shootouts, and that's talking about music. And this is a heavyweight bout. It deserves heavyweight Titanic songs, and I'm not messing around today with obscurity. Let's just pull some of the biggest songs I could think of and see how they compare. And I'm going to start off with no bigger band than Led Zeppelin. Houses of the Holy, 2496. I'm going to break down 3 songs off of that album, and because they really will tell you a story about the 2 IEMs when you listen to them. Now let's start with The Song Remains the Same. Now this is a tricky song because Jimmy's opening solo is very bright and very thin, and it pushes shouty on the Odin, borderline unlistenable in some cases. The Sultans, it's just hammer the gods time. It's the upper mids are reined in and keep the whole experience lively without fatigue. It's a full-bodied sound. When the bass and the drums and all that other shit hits, the Sultan is right there. The Odin does very well on soundstage, but on the heavy tracks down low, the heft that the Sultan adds to the experience more than makes up for the soundstage of the Odin. Now, Rain's song is kind of a more intimate number, and the Sultan, it does a beautiful rendition of it. The Mellotron comes in, makes a nice heavy canvas for Jimmy's delicate guitars. Really sounds very nice, and then Bonzo's drums crashing in with huge authority. Of course, that's going to play well on the Sultan, but the Odin's detail retrieval took it for me on this one. The speed and the detail of Jimmy's pick on the string is just amazing. The Mellotron comes in maybe with less authority as the song builds, but the song opens up late with this piano off in the distance. It's just amazing. And then you blend the Mellotron and the bass and the soundstage and the textures and all of that, and it's an easy win for the Odin. It just wins the day for me. It's this gorgeous, complex painting in 3 dimensions with space in between the instruments, whereas the Sultan kind of gives you this massive sound that the instruments are kind of there and they're tighter with force. Now, when the song builds, both are stunning in their own way. I just think that the Odin presented the song better. And I'm going to finish with Over the Hills and Far Away off Houses with the Holy. Now, when this song crashes into the chorus, the Sultan just dominates it. It's got so much authority. It's so enjoyable. The Odin is thinner at the top, and the acoustic guitar at the beginning of the song, you lose the body of the bass strings that the Odin just sits there and punches away at, and you get this rich, full-bodied acoustic sound. And then when you get to the chorus and that slam, holy God, is that impressive when it comes in on the Sultan. Next up, we got 2 songs off Hotel California, 192.24 recordings by the Eagles. The 2 songs I'm going to pick really tell the story of these 2 headphones. Now, the title track, it's just perfect on the Odin. Hotel California, you've got instruments perfectly aligned. You've got guitars far left, far right. You've got Henley and the harmonies coming through the middle. You've got a center pan lead guitar doing this call and response thing, and then the lead solo at the end. And then you've got 12 strings that phase between 10 and 2. Bongos, deep, wide, dynamic. The song is dark enough to kick the Odin out of the shouty range. Like, it never gets shouty on it, even on the SP1000. On the Sultan, you get an identical soundstage. All of that stuff and the spatiality where the stuff is laid out, hear the exact same thing on the Sultan. But the drums kick bigger, and so does the bass. And you're probably more immersed in the song than on the Odin, because the Odin does have that spatially thing just going on brilliantly. But the harmonies that are in the middle, they're a bit recessed on the mix compared to the Odin, and that's not a good thing. There's a wall of sound effect that's really pretty cool on the Sultan, and there's plenty of sparkle up top and detail and all of that. The echo effects are kind of cool on this one, and the bongos really hit with some impact when they come in, you know. But the lead guitars in the middle are more recessed, and there's this call and response thing between the verse and the guitars that goes on in this song. It's like they sing something and there's a little fill, and then they sing something and there's a little fill, and those guitars get too far recessed on this song, on the Sultan. Now, when we get to the guitar solo, another story. The guitars come right forward, they're perfect in the mix, it sounds great. But I really prefer the Odin on this track. The extra space on this track helps. It's an eerie song, it's a creepy song, but it's oh so cool. The Odin really took it for me. Now let's talk about the flip side, and the flip side of this is Life in the Fast Lane, track 3. The Odin's magic just doesn't hold on this song. The top end, this is that effect of where the treble and the bass sound like they're coming from two different headphones. The treble to me on this song sounds like it's sitting on top of the bass of a different headphone. It doesn't seem to be a part of the song. The Sultan integrates the guitars right into the song better. It gives a better cohesiveness. The Odin sits the treble too harshly on top of the song, and the snare doesn't sound as realistic as on the Sultan. The guitar solo turns piercing on the Odin. The Sultan holds it all together much better. It's a better experience. Now I'm going to do one analogy here, and this is going to sound maybe a little silly, but I want to relate this to art as we get closer to declaring who wins this shootout. Now, if I show you two artists' paintings and you go up close and you examine one painting, and you might notice that it has finer strokes and it has a more defined brush. On a technical level, it's a marvel. And on the other one, maybe on the other painting that's sitting next to it, maybe it's a little less defined. But when you step back and look at the whole image, you get a stronger expression, you get a stronger emotion out of the painting that doesn't have maybe the technical mastery of the other one. Does that make sense? And remember when I put the Odins in for the first time, way back when, in episode 4, I described it as sounding like it was a TV with all the shit turned on, with the brightness turned up, the contrast, the color, the sharpness, all of those details turned way up. And while it looks fantastic on the showroom floor, living with it is a different proposition. I've owned the Odin for nearly 6 months, and I find that I don't really listen to them that much because of their analytical quality. It's not a great time or a lot of fun for me to listen to these for long periods of time. Both of these monitors are truly, truly brilliant in their own way. And I feel unbelievably fortunate that I've had the chance to compare the two IEMs in this way. I think that I recognize that very few people get to experience $6,000 of anything and compare and run them off. But if you're going to offer me a night with the Odin or a night with the Sultan, I'm going to take the Sultan because it's better capable of keeping me interested for the entire evening. The Odin is going to wow me on a couple of songs, on certain songs. It's going to even exceed the performance of the Sultan. There's no question on some material. Its technical chops are peerless. But I will want to listen to the Sultan all night long because it's more musical, it's more warm. It gives me a better overall experience with a wider range of music. And that all-night comfort with the Odin, I'm done in about 40 minutes. It just becomes too much. Now, it's a spectacular, spectacular 40 minutes, but that's about all I can handle. So at the end of the day, as much as I appreciate the Odin and those technical areas where it has, to my ears anyway, a clear advantage over the Sultan, specifically SOUNDSTAGE and that hyper detail, the Sultan just does a better overall job when I swap between the two. I get more enjoyment out of the Sultan, and it's going to be the Sultan for me. Now, this pains me in many ways because it's going to cost me. I understand there are folks who will prefer the technical superiority of the Odin and think I'm crazy, which I am. I run this show. You know? I admit it. I get it. You know, there are things that the Odin does that the Sultan does not. But for me, there's a difference between admiring a headphone and living with a headphone. There are things that the Sultan does that the Odin does not. It presents a lush, rich, full sound that is enjoyable with all of my favorite music as long as I can keep them in my ears. I just can't say that about the Odin, as much as I appreciate what Empire Ears has achieved with this headphone. Now, I say that and I realize this is going to cost me some coin. But I gotta call it like I see it. What else am I gonna do? So this is gonna conclude a very long episode, and it's also gonna wrap up my time with the Noble Audio Sultan, and I'm kind of a little sorry to let these go because I really have listened to them quite a bit. So I'm going to send them back to Audio 46 with a huge nod of gratitude for sending me them in the first place. You guys are the best, and I'll be buying a pair for my own because I promised, and I'm not going to break a promise. And that'll be as soon as I find a new home for the Odins. We really need to get the subs up. So please like and subscribe. Hey, there's a giveaway coming at 1,000 subs, so make sure you're subscribed and push the little dingy thing and all that, because you don't want to miss the announcement, right? So you can get in. I'm going to need those subs because we continue to go for broke and go broke over here. Because my next episode is another major purchase. I really did it with this one. It's something that was on my short list for a long time. I'm very excited to share it with you, and I can't wait to listen to it for myself. It's going to be a really cool episode. That's coming up next. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you before you know it.